you.
Thanking Mozart by Jean Wong. It was a rare moment when 3 o'clock in the morning, misery and confusion receded as clarity clicked into resolution. I needed to leave Kurt for good.
Dr. Kurt Ross.
Brilliant surgeon, sculptor, photographer, woodworker, lover of art and mathematics. He was my boyfriend for the last 4 years. Yet, if a friend is someone you can talk to, I could scarcely consider him a real friend. Of course, who wouldn't have wanted it to work? Tall, reasonably good-looking. Kurt had a great sense of humor, was well-read, and filled with interesting stories and life experiences. It didn't hurt that he had a beautiful house with a marvelous Steinway Grand in the Oakland Hills. I'd met Kurt through my brother, with whom he'd enjoyed a 20-year friendship. I was delighted with this auspicious connection and established background check. It was such a pleasure to meet a decently intelligent and eligible human being. Are men really from Mars? Or are they just not hooked up properly? It took me a long time to realize that these two-leggeds are frequently cut off emotionally, both from themselves and from others. And Kurt was an extreme sufferer of this crippling malady. We traveled the world in conversations concerning art, history, and science, but he never dared go near what must have appeared to him the dark abysses of feelings or shared confidences. You couldn't say, "I'm having a terrible time at work," and have him ask you why, express concern, or offer advice. Similarly, he never spoke of his own difficulties or fears. Kurt was beset by dark, black moods where I'd be totally cut off from him, left outside of his boundaries. I can only imagine the insides of his head. Sludgy, dense, slow-moving, filled with painful childhood memories. There's really no telling, as he didn't talk about anything personal. Once we were joking about switching brains to see what it was like to be the other person, and he said,
"You don't want to be in my head, even for a minute."
I tried my best to ignore the defects of his character. But after 4 years of being stuck, fearful of being alone, I found this relationship to be unbearable. Some deep nourishment of my innermost being, my playful, affectionate, and buoyant nature was being smothered. The song in my heart was mutating to a heavy, discordant note. When Kurt woke up, I told him about my decision to end our relationship. He didn't seem terribly surprised, and perhaps even relieved that he would be free from my increasing need for a more genuine intimacy. He lamely muttered something about my
menopausal phase.
As he let me flee from his life, crying off and on during the 2-hour drive from Oakland to Sonoma. On my way, I stopped and picked up a bottle of Chardonnay and a pack of cigarettes. Arriving home, I proceeded to get drunk and topped off my celebration by indulging in smoking, a habit I had given up 10 years ago. Strangely enjoying my indulgence as I fueled my misery and exhaustion. I drank the third glass of wine before I fell into blissful unconsciousness. 3 hours later, I woke up wishing I could just stay asleep for a week. But when I looked at the clock, I remembered I had an appointment in an hour to play a duet with Mark, a clarinet player. I was a pianist enrolled in an ensemble class. We'd been assigned a lovely Mozart piece, and since Mark didn't have a piano in his apartment, we met once a week to practice at my house. I groaned and rolled out of bed, my head splitting, the room reeking of cigarette smoke. I aired out the house, took a couple of aspirin, and began brushing my teeth and washing my face. I looked at my woeful image in the mirror. As I gathered my resources to prepare for the company, I uncharacteristically said to myself, as I tend to be one of those look at me, I am so pitiful moaners, Jean, you'll be okay. Don't worry. Everything will be all right. Soon the doorbell rang, and in walked Mark. 8 years younger than I. Mark was medium height, balding, carrying a slight polish. His big brown eyes and boyish manner gave him a youthful quality. He had a gentle, unassuming, and sunny personality. Whenever we were together, there was an easy, relaxed give and take, and we found many similarities in our background and outlook on life. We began to practice our piece. Mark played beautifully, and of course, Mozart was no schlub. The sounds of the piano and clarinet began to intermingle, and I felt all my personal problems fall away as Mozart's musicality lifted my spirits. How glad I was that I always had music in my life, no matter what my circumstances. We went over the piece together, examining the dynamics of forte and pianissimo, making sure that the piano didn't overwhelm his solo sections. We experimented with the tempo and focused on the ensemble blending seamlessly. After an hour, I offered Mark some tea, and we sat down on the living room sofa and took a break. As we chatted, I noticed that Mark was slowly moving closer. His body language began to change slightly as he gave me that
boy interested in girl
look, and started to put his arm around my shoulder. I was so astonished that I immediately slammed my hand against my forehead and blurted out, "Oh my God, I just broke up with my boyfriend this morning." I could see from the look on Mark's face that this was not a very welcome or appropriate response. And I'm not sure he was any more enthusiastic when I began to nervously rattle on about my personal life and relationship with Kurt. Horrified at how self-absorbed and insensitive I was being, I eventually steered the conversation to more mundane subjects, and we resumed practicing. Thankfully, the loveliness of the music allowed the awkwardness of our previous exchange to slowly dissipate. Saying goodbye, Mark gave me a little hug and said he would
see you next week.
Feeling foolish, I decided the best thing for me to do was go right back to bed and crawl under the covers. As I passed the bathroom into the bedroom, I caught a reflection of myself again in the mirror, noticing bloodshot eyes and tear-stained glasses, and a still hungover, wasted face. I was amazed that anyone could still be attracted to me in this condition. Mark was so sweet, but I totally dismissed the idea of getting involved with a man 8 years younger than myself. I was 50 years old and way past the age of childbearing. What if he should want children later on? Moreover, with his clueless polyester shirts and nerdy looks, he just wasn't my type. I'm relatively tall, and have always been attracted to tall, trim men. We were actually the same height. But I felt that if I didn't have to stretch my neck to look at his eyes, a man was short and bald. I'd never been with anyone who didn't have a full head of hair. I needed a more macho-looking guy. But the main reason I would never consider Mark was because even I, who never acted with a great deal of wisdom when it came to men, knew you just don't go rebounding from one man to another. No way was the universe gonna say,
Oh, you poor thing, you lost your man today. Here, try this one out.
that kind of thing never works. And any exploration in that direction was absolutely doomed to failure. Satisfied with my pronouncements, I crept gratefully into bed, leaving the mirror empty of my reflection. I would look back later and realize that the mirror was no crystal ball. For not only would Mark and I, within a month, become an item, but one day, man and wife.
Oh.